All right, my friends, welcome to our first video lesson extra. In this lesson extra, we're going to be focusing on the output procedure. That is, what we do when we're done and we're ready to output a finished product for distribution on the web, broadcast, or otherwise. You can see I've got the montage project up here, and that's what we'll be using for this lesson. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our timeline is properly formatted for output. And there are a couple things that we need to add to make sure it's ready to go. The first thing we want to do is add some text, giving credit where credit is due at the end of the timeline. So you can see I've done that here. And this is one single layer of text, just return, return, return with all of these lines. Okay, so for the purpose of this class, we're going to use this for every single project we turn in. And we're going to credit the editor, state the fact that it's for educational purposes only, and give credit to the sources of our media, our music, our sound effects, our video, etc. In this case, Free Music Archive, freesound.org, and Videvo. So selecting this text element in the timeline and using the / key, you can see that this element is roughly 5 seconds long. That's a good length for this. Option X, and zooming in, you can see at the very end of the video here, I've included a dip to black so that the video fades and then the text fades in, okay? Nicely, okay? So I'd like you to do the same. And then at the end, I've got a nice 2-second fade on here. So the text slowly fades out. Looks nice and professional. All right, so there are a couple other things that we need to add here. We need 1 second of black video at the very beginning of the timeline and at the very end. This provides a buffer with absolutely nothing going on. No video, no audio, just pure black. And this, again, is a requirement for the class. Every single thing you turn in is going to have this 1 second slug at the beginning and at the end. So in order to get that into the timeline, we need to create some black video. So we're going to head over to the new item icon down here, the foldy piece of paper looking icon. Click on that and choose black video. That brings up a dialog box with settings that mirror the frame size, frame rate, and pixel aspect ratio of your sequence. Hit OK. And that actually brings a new piece of media, black video, into your bin structure. And it's a piece of media, so we're going to throw it into the media bin. Click on that. And you can see it's got a duration of 4 seconds and 29 frames, roughly 5 seconds here. And we only want 1 second. So what I'm going to do is take my playhead in the source monitor and move it away from the beginning, just a little bit in, and mark a new in with the I key. And then what I want to do is end up with exactly 1 second of video. Now, in a 30 frame timeline, you would need 30 frames to do that. 24 frame timeline, you need 24 frames, 25, 25, and so on. In our case, we're operating in a 30 frame timeline, so I need 30 frames to make that 1 second. Now I'm on the first frame already, so I need to add 29 more frames to the frame I'm on to get a total of 30. So what I'm going to do is use the numeric keypad all the way over to the right of the keyboard, hit the plus key, and you can see as soon as I do that, Premiere knows I'm entering time-related data. All right, so I'm going to add 29 frames to the frame I'm on, hit the enter key on the numeric keypad, and that moves my playhead forward by 29 frames. Now I'm going to use the O key to mark an out, and that will get me exactly 1 second. From in to out is 30 frames, 1 second of video. So the next thing I want to do is edit this into the timeline. So I want to make sure that I'm patched V1 to V1. And instead of doing an overwrite edit, I'm going to do an insert, okay? So I'm going to mark my in on my timeline here at the very beginning and use the comma key to do an insert edit and move everything else downstream. Boom, there it is. 1 second of video. Now I can check that. Zoom in, select, use the / key, and indeed, it is exactly 1 second. All right, Option X, zoom out a bit. Let's go to the end of the timeline, hitting the end key. And this time I want to overwrite another second of black because there's nothing else to push downstream. So I'm going to mark another in, use the period key to do that. Bam, there it is. Now I've got a second of black at the beginning, at the very end, and I've got my credit text. Excellent. Now we're ready for the next step. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is actually launch the Export Media dialog window. So we're going to head up to File, Export Media, or of course you can do what the cool kids do and use a keyboard shortcut, Command M. Now this usually takes a couple seconds. There it is, pops up, ready to go. Now, there are a few things I want to point out about this. Over to the left, you can see you've got a preview window that actually shows you the media that's in your timeline, the way it's going to look when it's output. There's the output tab right here. This is the default. You can look at the source and the output. Quite often these are the same, but they could be different if you had settings that were different from your timeline that you were using as an output. For our purposes, just the output window is fine. Okay, so over to the settings side here, we're going to go from the top down and set everything the way it needs to be in order for us to get the video we want. In our case, we're going to be outputting an H.264.mp4 video for upload to YouTube, Vimeo, or other web applications. So up here at the top, we're going to start with format. We're going to choose H.264. Not H.264 Blu-ray, not HEVC, H.265, just plain H.264. All right? Next, we're going to skip over the preset because we haven't set up our output with all the settings necessary to create a preset. We'll do that at the end of this. So right now we're going to skip over and move down to the output name. Now this is very important. You can see the output name here actually matches the name of my sequence. See this? That's why naming your sequence is incredibly important. If you have your sequence properly named, your output will mirror that, and the file itself will be named appropriately. The next thing we're going to do is click on the output name and tell Premiere where to send this. Okay, so we'll click on the name and navigate to our montage project and to the outputs folder. Hit save. And now Premiere knows what to call this and where to put it. We're going to make sure that export video and export audio are both checked. We're going to head down to the video tab here. And for the most part, we can just use match source. And you can see everything is preset here based on the settings of our sequence itself. So everything's grayed out. If we needed to change something, for example, the frame rate, we could uncheck the box next to that choice, hit the down arrow, and change the frame rate. We don't need to do that, so we're just going to leave it preset. Next thing we're going to do is choose render at maximum depth. Now, this most of the time comes into play when you're using higher level effects, color correction, certain blending modes, or you're doing pretty heavy compositing. It's a good idea in most cases to have this checked just in case. Sliding down. This is sort of a new area here, encoding settings. And right now, you can see under performance, it says software only. And that means that hardware acceleration is unsupported on the system that I'm currently using here. This is something that's very new, and I think as we go forward, Adobe will provide more support for various types of hardware that are shipping on newer systems. We're going to leave profile at main, level at 4.1. Those are both just fine for what we're doing here. We're going to move down to bitrate settings. Under bitrate encoding, we are going to use CBR. This stands for constant bitrate. it defaults to VBR, which is variable bitrate. And there are two different types of variable bitrate encoding, 1-pass and 2-pass. 1-pass is pretty quick and dirty, and 2-pass actually goes through the timeline twice, trying to make decisions, trying to balance the amount of data that is thrown into the output file per section of time. Most of the time, this works pretty well. I personally have had many instances, particularly related to fades to and from black, where there's a lot of motion in the video, where I'll get a considerable amount of pixelation. So I usually stay away from this, and I use constant bitrate, which basically throws the maximum bitrate into the file the whole way through to help assure the highest quality possible. And that's what we're going to use in this class, CBR. The target bitrate that we're going to use, clicking over here, is 15 megabits per second. Down to the keyframe distance, this refers to how often Premiere does a quality check as it's going through the output process and assures a point of the highest quality possible at the bitrate selected. I'm going to check the box, and what you want to do is use a multiple of the frame rate that you're using in your timeline. In our case, we're doing a 30 frame timeline, so we're going to do a keyframe every 30 frames, every 1 second. Okay, our video is not VR, so we're not going to check that box. Next, we're going to move over to the audio tab, and the audio format that we want is AAC, which stands for Advanced Audio Codec. Advanced Audio Codec, remember that. All right, the audio codec that we're going to use, AAC, once again, sample rate is going to be 48,000 hertz. This is a standard video sample rate when it comes to audio. 48,000 hertz, 48 kilohertz, or just simply 48K. Channels, we're going to go with stereo. Audio quality, we want it to be high. Honestly, I don't know why you would ever want it low or medium. We're just going to go with high. Next, down to the bitrate settings for audio. We're going to use the max, 320. And then under advanced settings, precedence is going to be set to bitrate instead of sample rate. Now, moving on to the bottom area here, we want to make sure that use maximum render quality is checked. We didn't render anything, so we don't have to worry about using previews. We're not going to re-import it into the project. We don't need to set the start timecode at anything, and we're not going to worry about rendering alpha channels. Under time interpolation, it defaults to frame sampling, which is just fine for what we're doing here. You can see there's an estimated file size here. This isn't always exactly right, but it gives you a good idea about how big the file you're exporting will be. Okay, so that does it for our settings on the right. There's just one more thing we need to check before we actually hit the Do It button, export over here. We're going to go to source range, hit the down arrow, and choose entire sequence. I want to talk about this for a second. It defaults to sequence in out, meaning that if you have an in and an out point in your sequence, Premiere will only export what is between that in and out. So if you only have 5 seconds of your 4-minute timeline selected in and out, that's all you're going to get is that 5 seconds. So I find it to be best practice to make sure that you have no slop at the end of your timeline, no clips that you were working with left over sitting at the end of your timeline, only what you want to export contained in your timeline, no ins and outs, and to choose entire sequence. That way, you get everything you edited contained in your export. All right, so we'll finally head over, cross our fingers, hope everything goes right, and click the export button. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to hide Premiere. Click into our montage folder, head over to Outputs, and here's our output file. Ready to go. Wonderful. Okay, so it's a very good idea to actually review your file and make sure that everything exported correctly with no glitches. Now we're going to head back into Premiere. And with the timeline highlighted, I'm going to hit Command-M one more time to launch that export dialog box. And you can see it remembers all of my settings from the last export that was done, except the source range. It doesn't hang on to that. So what I want to do is actually create a preset from what I've done here so that I don't have to go through every one of these tabs, click into all of these fields, and set everything up every time I do this. So in order to save a preset, you go over to the preset line here, and if you roll over, you can see you've got Save Preset and Import Preset. We're going to use Save Preset and name this 1080p, starting with the frame size and field order, 1080 progressive, underscore, H.264, talking about the codec that was used, underscore, and the data rate, 15 megabits per second. Hit OK. And now you can see that is actually contained in our list of presets, and we can just call that up the next time we want to do an output. It'll save us a ton of time and ensure that we get exactly what it is that we want when we do our next export. All right, so that is properly formatting our timeline for export with credits after our video, 1 second of black at the beginning, 1 second of black at the end, and utilizing the export dialog window to enter all of the settings necessary to get the output file that we desire, and then creating a preset to make things easier for us in the future. Okay then, my friends, that about does it for this Video Lesson Extra. I'll see you again for the next one.